From a start with a small newspaper in Adelaide, Australia, Rupert Murdoch built News Corp into a media empire that spans 50 countries. Then, over the course of 2 years, a series of phone hacking scandals threatened to break the whole global conglomerate up. David Folkenflik covered the scandals as National Public Radio's media correspondent. His new book, Murdoch's World, The Last of the Old Media Empires, is out tomorrow. Great to have you with us.
Hey, thank you guys so much for having me on.
This obviously was a tale that kind of mesmerized people, and one of the big questions at the time, and it does sort of remain a question, tell our viewers what you discovered about this, is whether this was a Fleet Street phenomenon, whether this was some nasty Brits, or whether this is something that did infect the entire empire.
You know, people were interested in whether this was endemic to the Murdoch news empire. And to be clear, there's really a double scandal. There was the question of widespread hacking of the messages on mobile phones of what turned out to have been thousands of people. But there was also a widespread bribery, by now a certain amount acknowledged and even confessed to, of public officials to get information from British law enforcement officials and others, information that should have stayed secret under law. And there are these twin scandals. Did that happen? You know, it did not seem to happen here in the United States. One of the amazing things about the success of Fox News, for example, is that it's not dependent on churning out scoops about celebrities and politicians. It's actually dependent on argumentation, which is much cheaper than paying hordes of reporters to go out and ransack people's trash bins and the like. So it doesn't seem to be that this particularly cannibalistic feral version of tabloid journalism infected the properties throughout the empire. What you saw were these cousins in Australia, here in the U.S., and in the U.K., where the same kind of culture that Murdoch created played out in somewhat different ways.
The Wall Street Journal, obviously being owned by Fox, by Rupert Murdoch, were they compromised at all during this whole thing?
Well, you know, the Journal is one of the, I call it in the book, the jewel in the crown. It's certainly considered the most distinguished element of the Murdoch media empire, and it's a terrific newspaper, now national, now somewhat guided under Murdoch's ownership since 2007 to become a bit more of a general interest newspaper, a bit less of the leading financial and economic newspaper of the country. But, you know, at a key moment, Murdoch's lieutenant, Robert Thomson, now the CEO of News Corp, but then the top news executive at the Wall Street Journal, amid the crisis of hacking, he sought to forestall and even prevent the publication of what could have been and was a very damaging story to Murdoch's business interests in England. That was in the summer of 2011, in the weeks after the hacking scandal's true eruption, and he tried to block it. I think it's to the Journal's credit that the story was published, but that credit really, from what I've told by many, many sources on both sides of the Atlantic, the credit belongs to the journalists in the newsroom of the Wall Street Journal and not its leadership. When the chips were down, Mr. Thompson sought to protect his benefactor and his patron, and that really showed you that loyalty at that moment would have trumped journalistic integrity had the newsroom itself not prevailed.
I guess, you know, taking a step back, looking at this this man and the empire he created, overcoming odds, and, you know, obviously it's a very colorful story, and his accomplishments are great, regardless of what you think of him or any of the properties. In the end, do you think that journalism is better served by the existence of Murdoch and his empire or not?
You know, I actually have a lot of admiration for Rupert Murdoch, a guy who had a small newspaper in a forgotten city on the southern coast of Australia and turned it into this sprawling global empire, clearly the most influential media figure, possibly one of the most influential people, you know, in these great English-speaking countries, with the exception perhaps of your own. And you know, what he's done is done that by he's pushed aside regulations, he's pushed aside conventions and the establishment to demand a seat at the table. He created networks that didn't exist here in the United States, in Great Britain, and he's subsidized through his wealth and riches the newspapers that he loves, both the tabloids, which for a long time were the economic heart of his corporation, and the more prestigious titles, the Times of London, which never really made money in the more than 3 decades he's owned it, or the Wall Street Journal itself in the last 5+ years. The Times literary supplement, you know, about literature and books would not have been something that made sense financially in a rational world, nor would have the New York Post. So in a sense, you say you cannot argue, no matter how you feel about his politics or his bruising and often cruel brand of journalism, you can't argue with the idea of more voices to be heard from.
Hey, David, tough question to answer in the 1 minute we have left, but how did Fox News come out of nowhere, really, to defeat CNN so quickly?
Well, I'd say it's a key insight of Roger Ailes that was shared by Rupert Murdoch, that there was a slice of the population that wasn't being served. It was being served by national tabloids in England and the UK, and that was a center-right kind of populist and anti-elitist kind of message. It was one that was at once, in a sense, articulated by Ailes and Murdoch at Fox, and it was nurtured a sense of grievance and resentment against what they portrayed as coastal liberal elites. And it not only identified, but it kind of created this audience that has been very, very faithful and has led Fox to these riches and ratings dominance for over a decade.
All right, we got to leave it there. We appreciate your time, David.
Thank you.
Hey, Amanda and Dave, thanks so much.
The book is called Murdoch's World, The Last of the Old Media Empires. David Folkenflik is its author.